Hello and welcome to Africa54. I'm Chamberlain Uso at Channels Television here in Lagos. I'm joined by Vincent Makori at Voice of America in Washington.
Well, thanks to Vincent Makori at our global headquarters here in Washington, D.C. Happy to be with you again for another edition of Africa54. Now, let's start off with a look at the welfare of internally displaced persons. Chamberlain Uso in Lagos brings you that story.
Well, that's right. The Norwegian Refugee Council and some civil society organizations in Nigeria's northeast are asking the federal government to urgently domesticate the Kampala Convention, a treaty which addresses the protection and assistance of internally displaced persons. Representatives of the groups who gathered at a conference in Yola, the Adamawa state capital, stressed the need to improve the welfare of affected persons. Channels Television's correspondent Freedom Haslan compiled the report.
At different times, certain incidents have led to the displacement of many people in parts of the country, ranging from the Boko Haram insurgency to floods, as well as the herdsmen-farmers crisis, among others. The most devastating being violent attacks by terrorists in Borno, Adamawa and Yobe states in Nigeria's northeast. Many of the camps that provided shelter for people who were forced to flee their homes are now empty, but their welfare is of concern to many. Stakeholders in the humanitarian sector in the region are meeting in Yola, the Adamawa state capital, to discuss how to alleviate the plight of IDPs, especially for those still in camps.
If you go to Malkoy, you find the IDPs. If you go to Fufore, you find the IDPs. If you, even the men come here. And there are hundreds of IDPs also within the host community. They are still there. For a very long time now, apart from the little support being given by NEMA, virtually everything has stopped. And these IDPs are actually putting a lot of stress on the host communities. So our main concern here in Adamawa is how do we now integrate the IDPs, those who are not willing to go back to their own ancestral homes.
Another focus of the meeting is to encourage the federal government to urgently domesticate the Kampala Convention, an African Union agreement which provides for the protection of internally displaced persons.
This is the third phase of the dialogue being in the Northeast, and we decided at civil society organization to come up with this statement in order to more push on the government to see the needs on how to domesticate this Kampala Convention in order to help in elevating the suffering of internally displaced persons living within Nigeria.
Now that we are having relatively peace and the insurgency is coming to an end, there will be a kind of rule to follow to make things right and not just push these IDPs back home. We'll be able to empower them, prepare their homes, and they will be happy to go back home. Because if they are not happy, we are not doing the right thing. So these people must be happy. They must be ready to go. They must see where you are taking them to and know that they are Nigerians and they are treated equally like Nigerians.
Participants at the meeting, facilitated by the Norwegian Refugee Council, also identify other issues that affect the welfare of IDPs, such as violation of rights, healthcare, education for displaced children, and their growing population.
All right, so joining us to talk about protecting internally displaced persons is Olugbenro Olajuigbe, the Executive Director of Emergency and Risk Alert Initiative. He joins us from our studios in Abuja. Well, thank you for joining us on the program. Nigeria has signed and ratified the Kampala Convention since 2012, well, yet it's not been domesticated. What, in your view, is the reason for the delay, considering how much IDP's population has recorded in recent years?
Yeah, Nigeria has signed a lot of conventions that have not been domesticated, but let's just focus on this. The issue with the Convention on Protection and Assistance to Internally Displaced Persons in Africa, which was actually agreed on in 2009, and ratified by Nigeria in 2012, is that we have a country where people don't want to hear anything about rights, even though we're in democracy, where people don't want to perform their own responsibility. That explains why the convection has not been domesticated up to this time. The governments after governments, I'm not referring to this government alone, has been treating the response to internal displaced persons conditions as issue of charity and not issue of rights. But the Kampala Convention tried to project it as matter of rights. And when you have a country where government feel that management of a critical situation of people like the IDPs should be seen as accountability-free zone, of course, they clearly and easily repudiate responsibility.
All right, the Kampala Convention prescribes a holistic approach to addressing internally displaced persons, including the protection and assistance of IDPs. For sure, this requires resources. How easy is the implementation of its provisions?
You remember that even though where you have refugee law backed up by UN convention, you find out that for UN, the issue of IDPs was issue of setting the guidelines. The guiding principle have been there. Some countries have been implementing the guiding principle. But the fact of it, like I told you earlier, is that the right of, for example, let me give you an instance. In what we drafted, we said that government can no longer, even if it is for development, like building roads, like building dams and so on and so forth, you cannot arbitrarily displace people without sufficiently planning for how they are going to live functional life.
Let's look at the welfare of IDPs now. Some of them are still in camps. Many of them are in host communities. How can these populations be assisted in order to ensure that they are properly integrated, especially economically?
There is no population at harm or population that is displaced that cannot help, that can be helped or assisted or supported appropriately. If one, there is no accurate or comprehensive documentation, there is no accurate needs assessment that has been carried out, and there is no functional institution that are delegated or delegated to respond to various needs. You find out that some of them have been wounded, some of them have their limbs cut off, and of course they need alternative livelihood. And they should be trained in this line so that they can become more useful to themselves and to society. All these things are not happening. They are not taking place. We still see what we do. Our response still takes the form of charity. And I want to emphasize again that government is not doing them favor by responding to their needs, especially in critical situations. And one thing that we should get straight in this country is that when you are faced by one disaster or the other, that does not take away your humanity. It should not reduce your right as full human right. You should not be treated subhumanly. And that must be avoided at all costs.
All right, then, Olugbenro Olajiyegbe, the Executive Director of Emergency and Risk Alert Initiative, thank you for joining us today on Africa 54.
Thank you very much.